Would not listen to you in America if you are a Palestinian historian, but they would listen to you if you are an Israeli Jewish historian. The Israeli troops poisoned the water of Acre, in order to make the city surrender. What we found in the archives is that from the mid-1930s, and definitely immediately after the Second World War, the Zionist political and military leadership contemplated and planned mass expulsion of Palestinians in order to create what they thought would be a Jewish democratic state. They wanted as much of Palestine as possible, with as few Palestinians in it as possible. Their main problem in 1947, 1948, when the British rule came to an end, was that the Jews in Palestine were only 1/3 of the population. And even when the United Nations took over the issue of Palestine from Britain and suggested to partition Palestine into an Arab state and a Jewish state in November 1947, the demographics were such that even in the Jewish state that was offered by the United Nations, the Jews were still not the majority, because there were too few Jews in Palestine in 47, 48. And the solution, definitely after the Second World War, in the eyes of the leading Zionist politicians and military commanders, was very clear. What I called in my book of 2007, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. The decision to expel massively the Palestinians from any area that would become the Jewish state eventually was taken in March, in the beginning of March 1948. That is 2 months before the Arab armies entered Palestine. And we wrote a story that most Israelis found very disturbing. We said, actually, the Arab armies entered Palestine because the Zionist movement was already expelling Palestinians for 2 months. And these Palestinian refugees began to reach the Arab capitals. And there was a pressure by Arab public opinion on the Arab governments to do something, especially after the Deir Yassin massacre on the 9th of April 1948, which was broadcast all over the Arab world. It was not the only massacre. So we described a sequence of events by which we said, actually, the Palestinians did not become refugees because of the war. They became refugees because the Zionist movement planned their massive expulsion, what I called the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity. And it was very systematically planned. In March 48, the army adopted something called Plan D, or Plan Daled. And according to that plan, Palestine was divided into areas, and each brigade of the Jewish Zionist army, later became the Israeli army, had a list of villages to occupy and to destroy and to expel. If you go to the documents, you can see that the Israeli army orders the troops in 1948 to occupy the enemy bases, to destroy them, and to expel the enemy outside of the country. Now, if you are a bit open-minded and you think in the 1980s about the occupation of the West Bank, if you think about the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, then you say, wait a minute, what is this base? Is it a military bunker with outposts, with regular soldiers, armed soldiers, or is it a village? It turns out it's a village, and that the enemy troops are babies, women, old men, and some soldiers. But they are all together the enemy. And therefore, the destruction of the base is the demolition of a village. And the killing of the enemy could be a massacre of civilians. And if you want to understand the Israeli narrative, you have to look at the map that this atlas has on the 1948 war. You can see thick, huge arrows coming from the Arab world into Palestine, and you need a very good eyesight to detect the Israeli arrow that comes to meet them. You understand what the image conveys, right? So we did something very simple. We counted troops, which we're not supposed to do apparently, because we found out that there were more Israeli soldiers than Arab soldiers in the 48 war. So it was not exactly David and Goliath. Maybe there were two Davids, semi-Davids, semi-Goliaths, I don't know, whatever you want. But it was not a David and Goliath. Not only that, we found out that the Israeli army was far better equipped in terms of arms, far better trained. But I don't want to underestimate the fact that there was a war between Israel and contingents from the neighboring Arab states who entered Palestine on the 15th of May 1948, the day that the British mandate or rule over Palestine ended. And this was a war. This was a proper war. People were killed on both sides. Well, one should say that. In the case of Israel and Palestine, because Zionism is a settler colonialist movement, namely, it's a project that has not been completed. Something which I think is very important to understand. The late Edward Said said, and I think there was a very poignant idea that he had. He said, if in 1948 the ethnic cleansing of Palestine would have stopped, if it would be one event, one-off event, as terrible as it was, it would have been possible to build a new kind of reality in the relationship between Jews and Arabs. But he said it didn't stop in 1948. Between 1948 and 1967, Israel expelled 36 villages in order to downsize the number of Palestinians within the Jewish state. When Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, it expelled 300,000 Palestinians. 3 refugee camps near Jericho were emptied. The Muslim quarter in Jerusalem near the Wailing Wall was emptied. Since 1967 until today, another 250,000 Palestinians were expelled in various means from the West Bank. And the expulsion, the ethnic cleansing continues as we speak. Sometimes it's just 1 Palestinian a day, sometimes it's more. But the main issue is that the Israeli notion of democracy is totally connected to demography. Namely, you cannot have a proper democracy unless you have a clear Jewish majority. And all the means are justified to get this majority. Massacre, ethnic cleansing, inducing people to leave, not allowing them to return. It's all part of the same methodology to sustain a democracy on the basis of racist demography. Listen, I remember I was in Washington with Noam Chomsky, and there were 2 members of the House of Representatives who were willing to meet us. But they only were willing to meet us in this tunnel that connects the 2 houses. So, I mean, we need to get these people out of the tunnel and say, come on, nothing's going to happen to you. Let's meet in the coffee house above the tunnel.